time. But at this point, we have more staff and subcommittee members than we do task force members. So I'm going to give it just a few minutes for everybody to join the call. Welcome everybody joining. This is Beric Abramson with Confluence. To anybody just joining or watching the live YouTube stream, we're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. My ask right now is that we limit those on camera to those members of the task force. We will have some members of the public joining, and we have a number of representatives from our different subcommittees who I will ask to come on camera when we go to each of the subcommittee updates. But right now it looks like we've got 3 or 4 members of the task force. I want to give it just a couple of more minutes. We are expecting most members to join today. Lieutenant Governor, it's good to see you. Julie, good to see you. Rep Ortiz, glad you're here.
Great to be here.
Good to see you too.
I hope things at the Capitol aren't getting too crazy just yet.
Rep Ortiz probably has more input on that than I do.
No comment. No, things are pretty easy going so far.
Well, I do want to respect everybody's time. We've got a lot of folks on. It looks like right now we only have 4 of what I believe are 9 members of the task force on, which will mean we don't have a quorum if we were to make any official decisions. I don't know that we have those on deck. Today is largely updates. So I want to respect both task force members and subcommittee members who have joined. Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, with your permission, I will just go ahead and kick us off unless you'd like us to wait a few more minutes.
I'm okay with kicking us off. I know Rep Ortiz is probably hugely busy. So
Yeah, let's get going.
Okay, we will get going. Let me just real quickly cover the purpose of today's meeting, which is really to provide some updates on everything that's happening, being directed and led by all of you here on the executive committee. We've got the 4 subcommittees who have all met twice now. The first one, as you all know, was really a grounding in the tasks and the charges. In the case of the rewrite committee, as you know, they've been able to undertake some work. They got a bit of an early start. The other subcommittees spent their most recent meeting really digging into what are the priority issues and looking at some of the sequencing and identifying the priority topics, as well as the research or data or additional information they will need to do their work as outlined in the legislation. Part of that, in addition to identifying research or additional perspectives, is identifying stakeholders that they'll want to listen to. So what we are starting with today's meeting, and we're going to do this at every one of the upcoming task force executive committee meetings, is to have some members of each of the subcommittees rotate through. I will provide a very high level readout on what the meeting discussed, and then invite the members of the executive committee and the subcommittee members to just engage in some casual conversation so you get the perspective of the work of the members themselves, and you can hear from them the type of conversations, their perspectives, and where we can use some support from the executive committee. So we'll go through all 4 subcommittees today. I think going forward, we will probably rotate and do 2 subcommittees at each meeting, because to give the work its due is going to take a bit of time, and I want to make sure we honor that. The other things we're going to do today is get a brief legislative update, and I want to be clear up front, this is just to get some updates Representative Ortiz is going to share with us a couple of bills. And the only reason we're talking about these is because some of them directly intersect with the work that this task force and each of the subcommittees are doing. This is not going to be an opportunity to get into advocacy or what we think of those bills, but rather to make sure that all of you are updated and kept current of any parallel work that intersects with the work of this subcommittee. Then, depending on membership, we may get to a conversation about committee assignments. We do also, as a task force, need to have a conversation about voting, and particularly how you all would like to see the voting at the subcommittee level funnel up to the executive council, and whether that simply means you want to hear each side or whether we want to set standards for what it looks like for them to advance votes to all of you. But that conversation will be pending us having a full turnout. The first thing I want to do then is turn to, I'm going to give the chairs an opportunity to offer any opening remarks, and then we will go straight into our discussion of the subcommittees. And I think we also probably will be having a conversation, as Rep. Ortiz flags, about attendance in general. Just as some operational reminders, again, for those tuning into the stream, you'll see a lot of people not on camera. I've asked anybody who is not a member of the executive committee to stay off camera until it's their time to speak. Subcommittee members will all be invited in. And if we have members of the public joining, I'll invite them to come on camera later. The other ask for those using a screen reader or who are using other technologies, we ask you to minimize and in fact avoid use of the chat. It can become distracting to anybody using screen readers or just for the conversation itself. My last ask will be that anytime anybody speaks, you introduce yourself the first time by full name, and as we go forward, at least by first name, so people know who is speaking. But with that, I'm going to hand it off to Lieutenant Governor and then Representative Ortiz for any opening remarks.
Well, thanks, Barrick. First of all, I just want to thank all the subcommittee members again and again and again and again. None of them make, big bucks, sharing their expertise and time with the subcommittees. And I just want to make sure that subcommittee members know how much I appreciate their input and their work. I also really appreciate you, Barrick, and how you run the subcommittee meetings. I know oftentimes myself when I've been on boards or commissions or something like that, and I really don't feel like my input is valuable, I'll lay back and I won't speak because I think maybe I don't really have as much to add as other people that might have more expertise than I do. But I appreciate the fact that you call on everybody. And everybody is expected to participate, whether they have all the answers or the input or whatever. I think it's really impressive the way you run it and make sure that people get a chance to participate. So I couldn't be more excited about the work that the subcommittees are doing. Oftentimes after I attend a subcommittee meeting, I'll text Josh or I will call him and I'll say, hey, what'd you think of that meeting? And wasn't that great? And I think we need to maybe think about bringing in this subject matter expert or that subject matter expert. So Josh and I have some conversations offline as well. I think I've also been impressed with the geographic diversity and the diversity of input. I think there's one subcommittee that I don't think has anybody who's blind represented, but I know Shannon is from the deaf community and I appreciate, his input all the time. So anyway, I think we all have so much to learn, and I appreciate all the work that the subcommittees are doing to help us learn and make sure that we have a Colorado, for all.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Representative Ortiz.
I mean, I can't say much better than that. I just want to echo the thank yous for everybody's participation and for members of the public that are listening in and kind of keeping track and offering their thoughts either now or in the future. It's been great to listen in on what's been going on in the subcommittees. It's been very informative and enlightening. It's been really cool to see the way that they're engaging and interacting, and I'm looking forward to what they come up with. So it's been great. And I want to thank Barrick and Carrie for their leadership throughout this whole process. So thank you.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate that. And we're just honored to be able to support this work and frankly, in awe and humbled by the work of the subcommittee members and everybody involved giving their time. With that, I want to go right into the meat of it. And Ian Kalmanowitz, I'll ask you to come on camera here. One of the subcommittees that I think you all are most familiar with the work of, because we got started early and you're receiving an update, is the Rewrite Subcommittee. And as you know, we started off looking at definitions around things like person with a disability and disability. And that sent us into having additional conversations like accommodations and some other aspects of particularly the ADA that are not currently codified within CADA or other aspects of the law. At our most recent meeting, we started identifying which are the big issues, and you've seen our list of issues to tackle. We started asking what was the sequencing that made sense and which should we tackle first. And there was pretty broad consensus among the group that we needed to get right at the issue of emotional damages and emotional distress. So that led into some conversation about that. That's where we're starting. And I'm going to stop my piece there, invite Ian in. And just to be clear, these are really intended to be some informal conversations. We want the members of the executive committee to get that member perspective. They're the ones that are bringing this deep expertise. They're also the ones that are going to be making the recommendations to you. So we want you to hear from them, their take about how the conversations have been going, where they see any tough points we're going to have to work through, and for you all to be able to ask questions of them. So Ian, with that, I'll hand it over to you to offer your thoughts on the conversations to date and anything you'd like to put on this group's radar that are going to be challenges and are going to be the big wins for us.
Well, thanks, Barrick. Ian Calmano is here from the CADA Rewrite Subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today. Like Barrick said, we've met a number of times. We've provided you all, I think, with our interim report, and we are really, I think, off to the races with going after the most difficult issues first. In my opinion, which are the emotional distress damages and the potential for fixing or revising or doing something with damages caps for the damages that are available. To date, what we have done is put together some proposed definitions for the committee to review and vote on, where we're really recognizing what I would say are some significant distinctions between the Americans with Disabilities Act and CADA, and frankly, places where CADA is behind the ADA and needs to at least be brought up to the level of the ADA. But in my opinion, I would think that the opinion of the majority of the subcommittee, we need to exceed the ADA. We don't want to just have the ADA be the law here. We want to provide a model for everybody else in the country as to what we can do to make this a more inclusive and welcoming state at all aspects of taking care of individuals with disabilities. So, we've proposed some definitions. We've written some definitions for the committee to review and vote on that we would intend to propose be included into any rewrite of CADA as sort of our first step, where everyone has agreed that approaching those definitions first, but continuing to approach different definitions at each meeting. I will add, not to pile the praise onto Barrick and Carey, but the way that they've been running these meetings really, I think, is a fantastic way of doing things, given that our subcommittee in particular is made up of lawyers and non-lawyers, advocates and non-advocates. And we're tackling what I would say are some of the more dense issues in terms of the language that's used in the statutes, why that language is important, and what the potential impacts of that language can be if those changes were to be made to the CADA. And I do appreciate the way we've really had a subcommittee-centered approach to this as opposed to a lawyer-centered approach. Because the lawyers on the subcommittee, myself included, can talk for days about this stuff, and if it's going over everybody's head, then they're really not going to be informed. They're really not going to be doing what they're supposed to be doing, and I don't think that we're in that spot, in large part because of the way these meetings have been run. I don't know, Barrick, beyond telling the task force what we've done so far, if there's anything particular you want me to highlight, if you want me to take some questions,
Why don't we take some questions? And I see Julie with your hand up first. They've read the report, Ian, so I want to make sure that we're able to field their input, their questions, and their suggestions. So, Julie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you, Ian. And if there are any other members of that task force, thank you. I agree. It's nice to see the work coming together. That's really exciting. So you answered actually a lot of my questions just by sharing, and I'm glad. I was wondering, like, well, why do we need definitions if we already have the ADA? But if you want to go above the ADA, that's totally fine with me. The one thing that I guess I'll just share its input more is I saw that there was something in there about exhaustion, and my understanding is we dealt with exhaustion in legislation last year, and I know that the disability, I'll just speak for the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition, but I think I speak for all the disability rights organizations that we absolutely oppose an exhaustion requirement. Like strongly oppose any kind of exhaustion requirement. And I can explain why, but I don't know that I need to, but I just wanted to get that on the record. But thank you so much for your work.
Yeah, and Julie, I appreciate that. Ian, I may ask you to respond to that because you're not the only one, Julie, that has raised the question of, are you intending to reopen this? And no, it's taking a more holistic look. But Ian, if you want to answer it, and then I'll go to Rep Ortiz.
Yeah, Julie, thank you for raising that point. We are not in any revisiting of exhaustion would be to make their uniformity with respect to exhaustion. And right now there's no exhaustion for certain kinds of claims against government entities. There's different exhaustion requirements for housing, public accommodation, and employment. And so the idea would be to have uniformity if there's going to be any exhaustion at all.
Like we'd be good with no exhaustion anywhere.
I would too. I mean, that was I advocated for that on the first go round of power and extended it from 180 to 300. We'd be good with no. I personally would be good with no exhaustion. I know that the CCRD might cringe to hear me say that, but no, we are not going to roll back anything. At least my perspective, and I can't speak for the whole subcommittee, but nobody on the subcommittee has expressed any desire or intent to roll back anything that exists currently, only to offer greater protections and to make things easier for people who need to invoke those protections. And that's the problem right now, right? Between the employment, housing, and public accommodation sections of CADA, you really need to be a lawyer to understand what your rights are. And we don't want that. We want this to be, common sense, easily understood, and more accessible to lay people.
Thank you, Ian. Let me go to Representative Ortiz and then Lieutenant Governor Primavera.
Thank you for that. And thanks for the report. Just want to echo the sentiment and just kind of call to attention that my whole purpose in fighting for, equal access, basic access, equity, disability rights is that, and to remind everyone that ADA was a start, it was a floor, and one that a lot of people think that are optional, full stop, dot period. So just as we talk about the ADA and getting definitions there, that's great. And moving beyond definitions, I don't want people out there hearing this that don't have context that are like, well, isn't ADA good? Hasn't it solved the problems? Why are we trying to go beyond it? Because I want to make it very clear that we living in the disabled community didn't get our civil rights until 1990. Yes, it started in the late 70s, but really the ADA was the start. It was the floor. Going into my question after making that statement is, what has attendance been like? Would it be helpful for the executive committee to kind of set some standards around attendance? Do you think that's needed or not?
Barrick, why don't you answer first and then I'll jump in.
I will say broadly, attendance has been great. There has been a member who has not been able to attend many meetings, and that issue has been raised and flagged to boards and commissions. But Representative Ortiz, I do think it would be appropriate that later in today's meeting, we have that conversation. I do think guidance and standards or expectations from all of you would be helpful to standardize things.
And this is Ian Calmanos again. I would just add that with the exception of one meeting that we had scheduled where we did not have a quorum, we have had a quorum at every meeting. And I will say that everyone has attended the meetings has been prepared and engaged and really has participated at a level that is beyond what I am used to seeing in board meetings that I've attended on boards that I've participated on for the last 20 years. So, I do think that things are going well, but I also think that given the amount of work we're doing and how important it is, an attendance policy and some expectations would be helpful.
Okay. With that, I see two hands up, Lieutenant Governor Primavera and then Elizabeth. And Lieutenant Governor, I don't know if this is something that you'll kick me under the table for later, but we just missed somebody's birthday. So I want to wish you a very happy birthday and appreciate you. With that, I'll hand it over to you for your question. You can kick me later.
Well, thanks, Barry. Birthdays aren't as exciting as they used to be because I can drive, I can vote, I can drink, I can do all those things. So not as exciting as they used to be, but thank you. So Ian, I really appreciate the emphasis I think the CATA subcommittee has put on plain language. I think Lauren Schwartz, who represents the business community, was talking about how she really does believe businesses want to do the right thing if it's clear exactly what they're supposed to do. So, I think clarity and simplicity are really important. And so I'm glad you brought that up. I think all of us, we get into our fields of expertise or whatever, we talk in these languages that we think everybody understands and they don't. Once upon a time, we had a $65 million grant for the state innovation model. And I would go around and I'd say to people, what do you think the state innovation model does? And they would say, we think they innovate from the state. But it was really totally different than that. So I think making really clear what we intend to do and what the language is, I think is just really critical. So thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Ms. Moran is going to get the last question for this subcommittee. Although we obviously welcome the task force to keep sending their questions to us, and we'll move them along.
Thank you, Barrick. So Ian, my question is around, I love that you made the statement going beyond the ADA, being that we are 34 years past it, and we're still like doing the low hanging fruit. And to Representative Ortiz's point, a lot of what we do is seen as optional versus as federal law. And so I will tell you sometimes when, I work for the Arc of Colorado. And so most of my stakeholders have intellectual and developmental disabilities, so communication disabilities, specifically around cognitive abilities. But we also cross over into folks with traumatic brain injury, our increasingly large aging population, and some of the disabilities, communication disabilities that come with aging. I've not been able to attend a subcommittee meeting. I would love to. In fact, Barrick, I would love to, can anyone send the executive committee calendar invitations that have the login information, the time and dates because I don't even know when all of them are until I got the agenda. And I was like, oh, happen. But then I don't even know how to log in. And so I have to go on a research hunt. So if you could provide that to all of us so that we could attend when we're able, that would be great. Ian, my question to you is around communication, particularly for individuals who have cognitive disabilities, TBI, aging, Alzheimer's, like when I'm thinking about kind of cross the lifespan, Can you talk to me about what just give me sort of a high level, what are some of the beyond ADA things that you all are considering?
What I can tell you is that we have not gotten into that granular level of detail yet. We're really at like big picture stuff right now, in terms of number one, sort of the big buckets that we feel we needed to work on based on, the mission. And then with respect to like definitions, by way of an example, we're looking at big definitions like what is the definition of a qualified individual with a disability, or what is the definition of the essential functions of a job, which are terms that are defined in the ADA, but that are not defined in CATA. We haven't gotten yet down to the level of communication, for example, with people with intellectual or developmental disabilities. I would say that is definitely on our radar, because that is something that is going to be important for all aspects of what we're tasked with doing. My focus in my day job is on employment, not on public accommodation or housing. but communication issues, with individuals with disabilities in all of those areas need to be addressed. And that's where I think partly what we are trying to do is look at what sorts of standards exist that we can adopt to give people that clarity that they need to know. So, one of the things that's come up has been the accessibility design standards that exist right now is published by the Department of Justice, and potentially codifying those within CADA for accessibility. Similarly, I think these communication issues are something that we need to figure out. What is the model, if there is one? And if you know of one, let us know. And if not, that's an area that we will focus on as we work through our list of tasks.
Thank you, Ian. And I apologize because we could probably have each subcommittee conversation for a good 30 or 45 minutes. We want to get you a high-level readout on all four today. Elizabeth, Carrie and I will make sure that the invites get out to all of the task force members for all of the subcommittees. We've now set them on a regular cadence, recurring, so that should be pretty straightforward. And as I said, we'll make sure we have fewer subcommittees at meetings so we can get into deeper conversations. But Ian, thank you very much for making time in the middle of your day. Welcome you sticking on the call if you want to hear from the others, or I know you've got a full load there at work, and appreciate your time. Next,
thank you all, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ian. I'm going to invite Craig Towler to come on camera. We're going to talk about the government subcommittee. And just to ground this, and I'm going to be really brief, but as a reminder, the big buckets that the government subcommittee is tasked with looking at are access to government services, participation in public discussion, employment in government agencies, and running for and serving in public office. And I will just flag before I hand it to Craig and then open it to the floor. Among the themes that have been coming up, that group just started meeting. We've kind of teased out some of the high-level issues within each of those, and now we're going to tackle them one by one. But people raised that we need to be looking at physical accessibility. We need to be looking at, as we just talked about, the communications accessibility, which all of this leads into digital accessibility. For every one of these categories, we've talked about transportation. Members have flagged the need to address stigma and the need for some culture change in some places, as well as talking about what reasonable accommodations are in all of these, and significantly transparency. But Craig, that's just my wonky notes, and would love your personal picture of what you've experienced or seen, and where you see this group needing to struggle through some things, where you think we're going to have an easier time, or whatever color you'd love to add, and then we'll open it up to the group.
Yes, thank you so much, Barrick. Hi, everyone. My name is Craig Towler, and I'm a member of the Access to Government Subcommittee. Thank you for having me here today and sharing a little bit about the work we've just begun. And as Barrick alluded to, we haven't gotten quite as far as the previous subcommittee, where we're not at the point of writing reports. We're still really trying to understand the scope and breadth of the work that is in front of us with so many broad topics, and we've kind of been starting at the beginning, as Lieutenant Governor Primavera pointed out the importance of clarity and simplicity. So we're really trying to parse out the definitions of these terms to really understand everything that is encompassed in access to government services. What does that really mean? And ability to participate in public discussion. And in the last subcommittee meeting, we went through all of these topics and went around the subcommittee, and we talked about what that brought to mind, the barriers and challenges within each of these areas. And we went around the group, and I think everyone spoke multiple times before we hit on the same point twice. And that just shows how large these issues are. And I think our biggest challenge and struggle is going to be to really couple the obvious barriers that we are all familiar with that are kind of surface level with physical accessibility within access, to the really systemic and not so surface level barriers, such as systemic ableism that are built in that really need systemic culture change within the work we're doing to not only provide the physical space and access to participate, but actually to feel comfortable in society, to feel like you can be on that platform to participate. So we're kind of dealing with these two things simultaneously. And I think that's going to be the biggest challenge, is to figure out how to take this work and create something practical and tangible at the end of the period. And that's kind of where we're at right now. It's been a really great exercise. We have a lot of great diverse perspectives, all with very unique lived experience, which is very helpful. And we can come at these topics at different angles. And we've all had very valuable points to add, and we're building off of the ideas that we're doing, and everyone's very passionate. So I'm very positive about the work, and I think we're on the right track, but we're still at the very beginning stages of trying to figure out, once we put it all on the table, where do we dig it and how do we organize this to be as productive as possible with these subcommittee meetings.
Thank you, Craig. And Rep Ortiz, I see your hand up first. Jump in, sir.
Yep, and I really love that you're on this subcommittee, Craig, because you've been at the CAP advocating for certain bills. You have seen the ways that it's inaccessible and the strides that they are making to move that way, but still how far they have to go. You have a few members, whether it's they're advocates and lobbyists like Hillary and Julie for CCDC, and also electeds like Chris Hines and myself that have actually run for office. So don't hesitate to use us for resources, because really, you guys.
Sorry, Ortiz, you're kind of breaking up a little bit.
Representative, we completely lost you on that second point. I
Yeah.
don't know.
You look at a lot
Representative, I'm afraid you were completely broken up the second part of your comments. If it's okay, I'll come back to you in a few minutes in case you get to a place with a little bit better reception.
If I could chime in, Rep Ortiz, I really appreciate that. And to touch on the first part of your statement before the connection went off a little bit, thank you so much. And we definitely will utilize the people that we have on the committee to talk about lived experience and help understand these barriers, such at the Capitol, more directly. And we actually did talk about potentially going on a subcommittee field trip. I don't know if it would be official, to the Disability Rights Advocacy Day on March 7th, because we actually have a subcommittee meeting scheduled for that same day. So instead of having to reschedule, I thought it'd be great to get everyone there in person and see firsthand these barriers that we're experiencing in terms of physical accessibility. So I think it's going to be, we have a lot of really direct ways to experience this firsthand, and a lot of really great people on the committee and subcommittee to share direct lived experience with, that will really make us be the most effective we can with this work.
Thank you, Craig. And because you brought it up on this large meeting that people may be watching the stream of or watching the video of later, I do want to address a lot of members appreciated Craig bringing up that we had a meeting of our subcommittee scheduled on the day that is that Disability Rights Advocacy Day. Because of the structure of this task force and each of the subcommittees, we have to be very intentional about not in any way even approaching the line that looks at advocacy. So we welcome any member that wants to attend that, but it will not be as an official meeting of the subcommittee, lest we even have the appearance of crossing into advocacy. But I know a lot of members are looking forward to attending that. And it certainly would be it could be an educational opportunity for a lot of folks. And Craig, I didn't mean to step on that or rain on anything. I just need to, as the facilitator, be very clear that we never cross this body's work into advocacy. But I know a lot of members do intend to attend that. Do we have any other questions from the task force?
This is Julie, just a comment again, thank you. And I second what Rep Ortiz said about, feel free, anything our organization can do to support you. We're very, obviously have been involved in accessibility of government for about 34 years. So we really appreciate all of the time you guys are putting into it and your leadership.
Thank you very much, Julie. Craig, thank you very much. I know a brief conversation, but it is so much more helpful for this group to hear from the people that are smart and doing the work than it is to hear from me, who just gets to sit there and learn from all of you and facilitate. Welcome you continuing to stick around on the conversation. And as I will say with every subcommittee, members of the task force will be hitting you up later to get you more engaged with each of the subcommittees. And if you have questions, if you have suggestions, reach out to us anytime. We're happy to get you plugged in and in fact, rely on that. With that, I'm going to ask Shelley and Anais to come on camera. Our next conversation is going to be about the housing subcommittee. And I will just preview up front. This to me proved in our first conversation to lay out the cards for possibly some of the most complex conversations we're going to need to have. It sounded really simple. Identify what the inventory is, identify what the need is going to be, and make some recommendations there. And while you're at it, hit on the financing piece of it as well. As we got into our first conversation, and this subcommittee, as you all know, is tasked with making recommendations around the inventory of accessible housing and the financing for low-income housing development that's accessible. As we started our conversation, we started realizing how much more complex this is. And when we say the inventory, where do we mean? Is it just a generic number statewide that we have enough units? Or are we drilling down county by county, community by community? And then if that's the case, what do we know about the demand, county by county and community by community? When we start talking about the demand, what do we know about what accessibility types different folks may need and have reason to be looking for? When we talk about that, members of the subcommittee brought up issues like it's not just the unit itself, it may be the community. You can have a perfectly accessible home, whether that's a multi-unit home or multi-home unit or a single family, but if the sidewalk outside of it or the neighborhood it's in isn't accessible, we've got another set of issues. So that's where we started, was really getting into what do we mean by accessible? Accessible for whom? What do we mean by affordable? Affordable to whom? And we can go off the 30% standard, we can go off a lot of things, but it started getting pretty complex, and we started identifying in our first meeting a lot of needs for data and research. So with that, Anais, I'm going to ask you to jump in first, and then Shelley, I'll bring you in. Would love your takes on those conversations we've had, where you have hope, where you're looking at it saying, this is a big lift, and anything you'd like to just share with these members.
Thank you so much, Barrick. Yeah, I would agree that it's a hefty undertaking to really break down the issues with housing. I'm Anais Campbell, and I'm with the ARC of Larimer County. And the community that we serve when it comes to disability is intellectual and developmental disabilities. So yes, all of the things that have been touched on by Ian and Liz, who joined in from the ARC of Colorado, really speaks to what accessibility means for the community that we serve at the ARC. And it isn't just physical accessibility. Our clients have intellectual and developmental disabilities. So that communicative accessibility, that cognitive accessibility is just as important. Unfortunately for this community, homelessness can be a revolving door if these specific accessibility needs are not addressed. And so what that looks like for me personally, and at least the clients that I'm serving, what their struggles look like is a need for those gatekeepers, for those organizations who give them access to housing, to have training on what plain language is, what easy read is, what relational accessibility is, so that there isn't an inadvertent misunderstanding or discrimination that can lead them back to homelessness. Like Barrick was mentioning, the geographic environment is crucial as well. Most of my clients utilize public transportation or access pedestrian walk areas to get to where they need to go. So placing them in a house is not the full picture, right? They need to be able to go out in the community and feel a sense of belonging and feel a sense that they can access different aspects of their community, not just housing. And then access to service providers is crucial as well. So having them live in areas where they can have access to service providers that provide those daily or weekly check-ins that allow them to remain independent and remain living out in the community. So that's what accessible means to us, right? Nothing easy there, I understand, but it is really what's required and what our clients are coming up against. Affordability for me, most of my clients are also on the extremely low income bracket. They rely heavily on Social Security income, which is $943 a month for the 2024 figure. So that 30% AMI is very exclusive. It doesn't include their perspectives and their needs. Attainable housing inventory for them looks like housing vouchers or Section 8. So that's a really big data need, and a real big question that I have here locally in Larimer County is, how much inventory is there in housing vouchers and housing choice vouchers specifically? And then that Section 8 program that allows those individuals to choose where they live and to really have an attainable home in the community. So yeah, it's no easy undertaking, but I'm here to do the hard work. So I'm excited to come up with creative solutions to these issues.
Thank you, Anais. And members of the task force, you're starting to get a sense of why my colleague Carrie is very busy assembling some large folders of data and research needs. Requests we're going to have for everybody from the census to stenographers to DOLA and some others looking statewide. Shelley, you bring a particularly interesting perspective and experience to this. What's your take on the conversations to date and our work ahead? And then we'll open it up to questions.
Great. So good afternoon. I'm Shelley Marquez. I'm president of Mercy Housing Mountain Plains. And the housing subcommittee has met twice now. And I would just say, I think there's a whole, just to add to what Anais had provided, a lot of discussion around the defining terms like accessibility, affordability, attainability, because it does mean different. It means something different depending on what conversation you're in. And so being able to have a common ground of when we talk about affordable, what does that mean in the community? For me, we are a national nonprofit affordable housing developer. So when we think about affordability, it's serving those that are under 80% of area median income. But as Anais had mentioned, you look at 30 to 60% AMI, that's not affordable. And so there are other folks on the housing subcommittee that talked about affordability to them is 30% of their income is put towards their rent or their housing expense, that is what they consider affordable. So being able to have a level playing field or understanding where we're starting from before we move forward. So a lot of conversations around what that looks like. And I think and Barrick had mentioned this, a lot of conversations around the geography that we can talk about what's happening in the urban core, but what's happening in our rural communities where there may not be, housing could be built, but if you don't have the infrastructure to support that, it doesn't set up someone with a disability to really succeed in that environment or to be able to have access equally. And so that conversation just led to additional questions around data and how do we dig into that information. We did spend a lot of time talking about how we can utilize data and research and what organizations can we tap into to access a lot of that data. And so we've provided a list. I know we'll be looking at what Engaged Dora can provide, but looking at data from CHAFA as an option, and the demographers along with the assessor's office and census data will really help inform how we build out the work. And I would say the last thing that this subcommittee talked about was really how this work, it may require more than just meeting once a month, but finding a day that we could all come together to do a deep dive into looking at data, or maybe it's a month where there's a couple of meetings, but we understand the importance of gathering information and being able to have a meaningful dialogue to then make recommendations. So looking forward to working together with the subcommittee, and I can turn it back over to you, Barrick.
Thank you, Shelley. And just another example where I am so humbled by this group who We asked them to give a lot of their time free. And then on the last call, I said, hey, can we double that ask? And nobody blinked. I'm going to go to Representative Ortiz, whose hand was up first, and then to Julie.
Just want to start with the sound check and see if you guys can hear me better now, if I'm still coming in broken.
We have you fully clear, sir.
Okay. This issue is huge, and I really appreciate and am amazed at having such thoughtful subcommittee members that are leading the charge on this conversation. I just want to make sure that, and this is just one opinion, one perspective, that we're not losing the real focus of accessible housing, right? Like the one thing that I heard that to me spoke about accessibility and attaining housing was plain language contracts, right? And making sure that they have services, like have the Section 8 services to be able to afford it, great. If we're talking about being able to have the whole infrastructure of support, in my mind, that's the entire work of the task force. That's not, I feel like now we're getting lost in the weeds, and I feel like we're not talking about the heart of the issue. We're talking more on what's in the periphery. And if we can't even strike at the heart of accessibility, like plain language contracts, like making sure there's stock and making sure like direct services in the home, or making sure that there's more access to Section 8 vouchers so that these people can, so that we can afford the housing, I think we're losing the focus of what this task force is about. That is my opinion, my perspective. If we're going to be focusing on sidewalks and rec centers, and that's, don't get me wrong, but in my opinion, that's not the real focus of this subcommittee.
Representative Ortiz, I think this is exactly why we wanted to be able to have these conversations. I'm seeing, I know you're driving, I'm seeing Shelley and Anais nod, as are Carrie and I. We really appreciate that kind of feedback. We had started off just having that broad conversation of what do we mean when we say accessibility and affordability, which led to that laundry list. I appreciate you providing us that feedback for the group to consider about really kind of tiering out and focusing on priority issues and tackling those first. So I appreciate that feedback for us. Julie, let me bring you in.
Thank you. Again, Anais and Shelley, thank you so much for your work and everything you're doing and your presentation. Anais, when you were talking, I was sitting here like yelling to my dogs, yes, 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 because those are so much of the issues that we hear about at CCDC. And I agree, like, I think we can get off track with like things like rec centers and all of that. But I also think that for many of us with disabilities who are non-drivers, who don't drive, access to transit and walkable communities, and I don't want to get into bills, but like density issues are super important, because we can't live out in the middle of nowhere without access to those things, because then I mean, again, not as bad as like an institution, but we are isolated if we can't get out and around. And so I think certainly for those people with disabilities that do drive and can afford to drive, there are more options. But I do think that transit access is a huge piece of just what accessibility means to, not to all of us, but to some of us and a lot of us. And then affordability, that's what we hear at CCDC all the time, particularly for the very low income. But both SSI and SSDI, even though they get a little more money, they are actually in worse shape, because you're actually better off with 943 than you are with 1600, because if you have 1600, you're not eligible for any help. But you still can't rent, at least not in the metro area, or I think most of Colorado, you still aren't going to be able to afford to rent, but now you get no help. So you're almost better off with that being on SSI. So I think the affordability is super big. And then even when we talk about physical accessibility, the whole thing of like having to pay to make a modification if you're not in public housing, which is again, and then having to pay to put it back, which is totally ridiculous. But like all of the programs that cover modification of homes do not want to cover renters, which is understandable because we don't have enough tenant rights. And so these programs, including Medicaid, they don't want to pay for something only to have the tenant non-renewed or constructively evicted, 3 months later. So I understand that, but the problem, the middle thing is that the tenant is in the middle. So they might be in a situation where they need grab bars, but they can't afford to put them in, or they need, they can't reach the sink, so they're, like leaning over a hot stove and burning themselves because there isn't a cutout or whatever. So I think that was just one more issue. I know that that's probably, you haven't gotten there yet in your discussions, but I really appreciate the full view of accessibility that you're taking. And again, it's a line, right? So you, like Representative Ortiz's point is well taken. We're not going to like kind of get every single thing, but we also want to make sure that we're focusing on the needs, the greatest needs. So, and making sure, just like with the other one, that we're not watering anything down, to say like there's still laws that say like if you're building like an apartment building for luxury people out in a resort, you still have to do some accessible. There might not be very many of us that could afford that or that would want to be there, but that we're not going to take away those requirements, right? So again, I really appreciate your work, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. And Julia and Representative Ortiz, I think in both of your comments are really helpful feedback for us as facilitators and for the members that are here, and we'll huddle with the subcommittee on making sure we're prioritizing what should be the tier one issues to tackle and what falls into that. I think you're also probably getting a preview of, realistically, these subcommittees have the next 7 months to do the bulk of their work, investigating and conversations, and then we'll be in drafting the recommendations to hand off to all of you. I expect realistically there will be some very powerful recommendations advanced, and there will be some recommendations of the additional work that is still to be done to be able to solve the full spectrum of issues and topics that are being raised. Anais and Shelley, before I move on to the next subcommittee, any responses or final thoughts?
I just appreciate the feedback. I think this is a multifaceted issue that weaves in so many other sectors. But I understand that our main focus is housing. I think we would just be remiss to not think about all the other variables that are involved in housing. So finding a way to balance those two things is certainly one of my goals. And I also want to, I want to honor that there are multiple perspectives within the subcommittee, which allows us to kind of find that middle ground and allow us to dance a little bit towards what would be a sensible solution to some of these issues. So looking forward to working more on this. Yeah.
Shelley?
Yeah, I would just echo that. That was well said. It is a topic that has so many different challenges, but we understand, and we have committee members that bring us back to the purpose that this subcommittee is together, and so we're reminded of that often. But I appreciate the comments of where we need to stay focused, and it is a tough topic and a lot of different perspectives but we've got the right subcommittee that brings not only urban experience but rural, and that we'll be able to stay focused on what we've been tasked to do. So thank you for the comments and feedback.
Thank you both for joining and for the continued work and the willingness, as everybody heard you say here, you're willing to do some extra meetings, and I'm taking you up on that. Really appreciate you both joining us. Sharon, I'm going to ask you to come on camera if you're in a place to do so. Our final subcommittee discussion is around the outdoor recreation subcommittee. And this one, we've had some lively conversations. We've got a great mix of perspectives, lived experience, expertise, and professional lives. In our last meeting, we started digging into a few topics. And we wanted to make sure that, again, we were grounded in the big charges that we're tasked to looking at around the barriers to access, to everyone being able to enjoy all of Colorado's outdoor recreation opportunities, including publicly owned, private owned, hotels and resorts, the issues around transportation, and some of our recommendations being policy, some of them being best practices and guidance. The topics we got into most recently, and I'm going to ask Sharon to add the color, we started really digging into What are the barriers to access when we look at a lot of different types of recreation? And we talked about things like access to trails. We had the opportunity, given the time of year, to talk about access to snow sports. We talked about transportation to these things. There was some back and forth between members, and I think it was healthy conversation, with one question being, do we focus on those sports or activities that are participated in by the greatest number of people? Do we look at where it's concentrated in a high density area? Or others suggesting we need to look at all opportunities. When we say access to all for all, we need to mean access to all for all. Sharon, I'm going to keep my remarks limited to that. I would welcome you just giving your sense on the conversations we've had and where you see us going with it, where you're excited, where you see some uphill conversations, and where this board might be able to give us, or this exec committee might be able to give us some input.
Yeah, the topics and discussions are challenging because like defining a disability, it's hard to encompass everything. Outdoor parks and recreation, it's hard to encompass everything that, you know, should be accessible. I think for me personally, I almost try to remove the idea of it just being a disability issue and topic. I feel like our family members are aging. We have different people that are going to go through these circumstances at some point in time. We have to be able, as human beings, be able to access these things. We want to participate. So it's tough, and I'm new to all this, so I don't know what the extent of, you know, policies are possible, where we can actually move the floor up and make this a starting point where it's not backtracking, but actually a new standard, if that makes sense at all.
Thanks, Sharon. And just to add some to layer on to what Sharon shared, we had the opportunity to talk about everything from what does it look like if you use adaptive equipment and you show up to whether it's at a ski resort parking lot, can you drop your equipment off in a safe place, to if you're using different equipment on trails and need to get between any barriers or access that. What is the reality about transportation? Where are we talking about the additional facilities around these resources themselves? Rep Ortiz, you've had the opportunity to be at these meetings. I want to get you in here since I see your hand up.
And just going to do another sound check because you guys are coming in choppy, so I want to see if you're able to hear me or not.
We have your sound 5x5. You are clear.
Great. Yeah, I mean, it's really great to be a part of these ones in particular because I have a lot of experience in this area as well. The subcommittee members are great, and I just want to again refocus us when I talk about needing to keep the focus. The way I look at it is you got to start from the inside and then move out, right? So like if we can't even access trails, if we can't even park, get our equipment set up, and then get through into the trailhead to access the trail. If there's bathrooms for everybody else, but there's not accessible bathroom options, right? Like that's what I mean, inside out. Then we can talk about resorts and hotels. Then we can talk about, you know, lift access, you know, just kind of trying to systematically think about this and also think about it systematically around universal design, right? So like if there's an area that has like a call box or something like that, and there's a map that talks about the trail, or if there's any way that somebody that's deafblind can use the app on their phone to be able to access, you know, electronically what the map says, what it is, and since they aren't able necessarily to see it, that's what we're talking about, or plain language when it comes to the map. These are all things that we need to think about systematically, but it has to start from the inside and then start biting outwards. And then like this will go for any issue, whether we're talking about government, whether we're talking about housing, because if we can't even get in, then the rest of the accessibility doesn't even matter.
Thank you, Representative. And you remind me of what I thought was a really interesting conversation. People saying, isn't there some way that we could have, whether it's an app or some other resource that is accessible to everybody so that we can know what is accessible about that trail and what its features are? Lieutenant Governor, your hand is up, please.
Thanks, Barrick. Well, you know, I really appreciate Sharon's participation in the outdoor rec. I think one of the things, and I could be wrong, Sharon, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, one of the things that was brought up in terms of people enjoying the outdoors, especially when it comes to skiing, is cost being a barrier. And so for those of us who can't afford to ski, and I was one of those single moms for decades, that's a barrier. And then, so I think Sharon brought up the fact that, if we don't have the money to ski, there's lots of ways that we can recreate in the outdoors, and just making sure that our neighborhood parks are accessible. And I thought that was really an interesting perspective, because I was thinking of skiing and golfing and all those kinds of things, but just our neighborhood parks, I think are really important. And I saw on TV, I think it was last weekend, that Ruby Hill has now become a urban skiing destination. So, they're renting snowboards and they're renting skis and things like that for people that can't afford to go up to the mountains and ski. And I thought, well, maybe there'll be more urban ski areas pop up for people that can't afford, to go to Vail and places like that. And if so, then we need to get in on the groundwork of making sure that they're accessible, right from the start. So anyway, I appreciate your participation, Sharon.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. And Sharon, not only were you named, but you had your hand up, so I'm going to invite you back in.
Yes, thank you, Lieutenant Governor. And Representative Ortiz had mentioned a couple of things earlier with some of the ADA laws that I hadn't really thought about before, but a lot of the devices and equipment and different things that we utilize now were not in place when a lot of these laws were put in. So there's just a lot of things that we need to rewrite and rethink about. I was talking to a friend the other day who was wanting to go, I believe it was ski at one of the mountain resorts, and it's really disappointing because I can plan a ski trip, get my kids to the mountain, get them equipment, and get them on the hill. And there's a lot of things that I can't do for myself. I already have enough challenges and, hurdles to overcome. But just to do the things that a normal person is doing, not only do I have to deal with my equipment and the challenges of getting there, but they don't even have the equipment available without sending me to another mountain that's 30 minutes away just to participate in family activities. And so that's something that's, not really fair in my eyes. And that's not even considering the other challenges like transportation and income and cost. So, these are things that we definitely want to work on, not just for people with disabilities, but family members, like I said, as well.
Thank you very much, Sharon. With that, unfortunately, I've got to wrap up our time on the subcommittee assignments. I think all of the members are seeing the amazing work that these members are doing, the complexity of it, and I appreciate all of you regrounding us to keep eye on the prize and focus on primary objectives. We will make sure that we double down on that. I think, as I said a minute ago, it will mean that we offer some what I think will be powerful recommendations out of each of these, and offer a section on some work that will need to be continued to be done. So as Rep. Ortiz has reminded us, everything that is out there becomes the floor, not the ceiling, and Colorado sets the next standard. We'll continue to provide updates. We'll make sure you get the minutes. We'll make sure you get the invites. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about what's going on under the dome right now. Rep. Ortiz has generously agreed to give us some updates on his bill, one by Rep. Froelich. And again, as I said at the top of the meeting, or for anybody watching this stream, this is strictly to get an update on work that is happening at the Capitol and in the legislature that intersects or may affect the work of this task force and subcommittees. It is not intended in any way to become a platform for us to favor or oppose any legislation. With that grounding for members, since Rep. Ortiz and I had already discussed that, Rep. Ortiz, I'll give you the mic to talk about activity happening in the legislature that intersects with the intent of our work.
Outstanding. Appreciate that, Barrick. So I'm going to start with Rep. Froelich's bill. And essentially what this is doing is taking one of the smaller section from our all-encompassing basic access and government bill and building off what we've already been doing while it's still fresh in all of our minds. There was a lot of lessons learned coming off of COVID. One thing that we did learn was that when able bodies were threatened, something that community living with a disability had been asking for forever, which was virtual access to work, to participate in government, all the things, all of a sudden became real possible real quick. And given the time frame, we want to make sure that we don't lose that infrastructure and we don't lose those lessons learned. So her bill is seeking to make sure that people are able to participate in government virtually. So that's the bottom line. what her bill is going to do. So please participate in those conversations, reach out to her or my offices. And if you have any input, questions, comments, concerns, we can show you bill language. We can show you where pro, con, opposition is. Again, this is not about advocating for, this is just informing, and we can get you more information if you want. The next one I'll discuss is the access to the ballot bill, which will be coming up on committee on the 5th of February. And the bottom line of what this does is protect access to caucusing. There's been a movement across the board, doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican, but there's been a movement among some to get rid of caucusing. And I'm not saying there's malicious intent in here, because there's not, but the bottom line is caucus is the only truly accessible way to get on the ballot. And I'm speaking from personal experience. So we need to make sure that this remains a viable option to get on the ballot. And we're also building in other accommodations within it. We're working with the state parties now, because what they're worried about is that they get a last minute request and then they're going to get sued. That's not the intent of the bill. The intent of the bill is to make sure that if a participant has a request, that they do it in a timely manner, whether that's ASL, hybrid, virtual participation. If they're in a rural area and they don't have reliable broadband, then it's going to be up to the party to decide, well, maybe we'll do it by email then, or maybe we'll do it by phone conferencing, or mix of both. What we care the most about is protecting caucus and asking for the attempt, make sure demonstrating that there was an attempt made to make caucusing as accessible as possible for all. The next one that we're going to be working on is a housing mod bill, strictly striking at the point that Julie made earlier, which is if an individual makes modifications, accessibility modifications, basic access modifications, using their own money, that they are not then required to remove them on their way out. And again, this goes to our basic premise that universal design hurts no one. It only helps anyone. So those are the three that are starting to come forward already. There's a lot more there, but I'll leave it there and we can have future discussions as the other bills come forward, unless Barrett wants to ask specifically or wants me to bring up specifically another bill.
Nothing else. Thank you, Representative. I do want to open it to the floor for questions, but I'm going to put pretty tight parameters around that to protect the integrity of this task force. If folks have questions for clarification for Representative Ortiz, I would welcome them. If you have questions that are around support levels or challenges or prospects for the bill, or you have suggestions for the bill, I would ask you to take that out of this task force and communicate directly with the representative or the sponsor. But does anybody have questions of clarification for Representative Ortiz about these bills that he shared? Okay, I don't see any. We will make this a standing item during ledge session so that everybody stays up to date. And in case it creates the need for us to have a conversation about how, if at all, any bills being passed or not may affect the work that we ask our subcommittees to do. But Representative, thank you very much for bringing that background. Next up, we want to talk a little bit about how we're going to be doing some community engagement. And I'll ask Carrie to share a little bit about what we're doing here. With each of our subcommittees, we have made it very clear that we have great appreciation for the 7, 8, 9 members of each who are on calls. We also recognize that there are so many more perspectives we need to bring to the table, whether that's professional expertise, technical expertise, or additional lived experience. So we're going to be working with each subcommittee to identify when and how frequently and on what topics they want to engage additional stakeholders. We've asked them to start the work of identifying who in their network, whether it's a specific person, specific organization, or constituency, we're going to want to engage. But Carrie, if you would share where we are with Engage Dora, and for those that don't know, kind of a 2-minute what it is and where we are with rolling things out for the subcommittees.
Yep, thanks, Barrick. I think we gave you a little preview that this was coming. It is now live. So you can go to engagedora.org, and I'll follow up directly after this meeting with a link so you can check it out. This is really where we are going to have the ability to really engage stakeholders broadly, and that means geographically. That means through various means of accessibility, whether it's written testimony, people can sign up for public comment. You'll be able to, on this website, you'll find the links. I can't remember who brought it up earlier, maybe Kirsten, about upcoming meeting information. We have now rolled out, created a standard Zoom link for all upcoming meetings. All the information for this main task force, as well as each subcommittee, is available now on that site. And one of the most powerful things we're going to be able to do is to collect stories. People will be able to go on to the dedicated task force site, share their lived experience. So we're hopeful. I will send you all this link after the meeting, and I'm hopeful you will share it among your networks, on your socials. We want to go as broadly as possible to make sure we are hearing as many voices across the state as is possible. To follow on to that, you will also be getting a link to the task force survey, where you will be able to offer your support to all the subcommittees. We wanted to hear kind of from each subcommittee what they were going to need in terms of support. You guys heard a little of that today, so you'll be getting this pretty comprehensive survey where you'll be able to offer your expertise, your lived experience, your materials, your research, whatever it is you care to provide. Hopefully it's easy for everyone to get in there. But for now, that's it. Look for a quick follow-up email from me directly following this meeting, and reach out directly if you have any other thoughts or ideas as to what we can add to that.
Thank you, Carrie. And at that point now, I make a couple modifications in the agenda. We had intended to have a conversation about subcommittee assignments, but as Carrie shared, we decided to adjust course a little bit, let you hear from each of the subcommittees. We had a conversation, obviously, on the last executive committee meeting about interest. Since we're missing a few members, I have a follow-up briefing scheduled with Michael Stone, who knew he wasn't going to be able to make it, but we're going to hold this conversation, and we'll probably be reaching out to each of you individually after Carrie sends that outreach to see where we can pair you up with one, if not two, of the subcommittees. And I know most of you have already volunteered to do so. I also will flag that in 3 minutes, according to the agenda, I would be moving us onto public comment. For anybody watching the stream, the only reason I am not going to be doing that is I don't see anybody online from the general public, unless somebody from the public coincidentally has an identical name to one of our subcommittee members or our executive committee members or state staff. If that's the case, I am both surprised and impressed, and feel free to then drop me a note in the chat. But otherwise, we are skipping public comment because we don't have anybody from the public on these meetings. I do expect, frankly, that as conversation warms up around our work, which I know word is getting out, as well as some of the bills that Representative Ortiz shared, we'll have more public engagement, and I think Engage Dora will help drive that. So we're going to hold public comment. We're going to hold subcommittee assignments. I'm going to shift us to some topics that came up at the start of the meeting. I do think it's important we have all the members to have a conversation about attendance. I would welcome people sharing that. One of the more pressing issues for our subcommittee has been the question of how are we voting on recommendations? Do we have to all agree on what we're recommending? Is it 50+1? Is it 2/3? Is it some other supermajority? Will we be offering the executive committee the vote breakdown, including who it was, which is where most committees are leaning? And will we be providing both a majority and a minority or opinion or different ideas? The general thinking from the subcommittees has been they want to be able to share with all of you the thinking of the overall group. They don't want to just limit it to this is what some form of majority concluded. They want to share that, as well as where there were differing thoughts and what the basis or background for was of that. We are probably at least 3 to 5 months away from taking formal votes that any of these groups would be advancing to the executive committee. As you all know, each subcommittee has to submit a report to you all no later than December 1st. We can continue to talk about what information you'd like to get sooner than that, so we're ahead of budgeting season and ahead of early bill title season. But I thought it would be important for us to at least open the conversation. And so we're not going to go to a vote on this, but I would love each member of the executive committee to offer your current thinking on what you would like to see, both in terms of what would constitute sufficient votes in a subcommittee to make that a recommendation that reaches you, and how do you want to receive where there are multiple opinions or perspectives on those issues. As much as my goal as a facilitator is to get everybody to reach consensus on absolutely every topic, I'm too experienced and not naive enough to think that's going to happen on every issue. So we'd love to get your input. And with that, Julie, I'm going to go to you first. This is one of the few places where I'm going to go around the horn and I'm going to ask everybody. So I'm going to go to Julie and then Kirsten. Your thoughts on the voting and what information you'd like to receive from these subcommittees as they do their work.
I actually thought the report that we got from the CATA one was really helpful. Once they're getting to recommendations, I guess I'd kind of like to see, again, the summary of here's the recommendation. Either it was unanimous or it wasn't, like what's the minority opinion, if it, again, assuming that there are going to be some that are not, and maybe bullet points of what they like the pros and the cons. I think in terms of voting, it should be again, I'm kind of a majority rules, but a minority gets their opinion noted type. That makes sense to me, but I think, again, I don't know if there are rules with the state thing around quorum and all of that. But I mean, at some point you can't just hold things up if people aren't showing up. It's got to be the majority of the people that are there. Initially, I think there were concerns that things weren't being scheduled with enough time for people to clear their schedules, but that has all been corrected, and thank you for that. So I feel like now that has all been corrected and that there is time, I do like the idea of us all getting that calendar invite. So that, but I think that we also as the committee need to not micromanage the committees. Like I kind of feel like we need to let them do their work and come to us. And if we go, it should maybe be to listen but if I don't have that right, then someone should tell me that.
Now, let me kind of work backwards through that and then get to Kirsten.
And I will apologize that I do have to leave at like 4, like about 7 minutes early.
Quite all right. I appreciate you being on as long as you have. Just working backwards, we welcome any member of the task force to join any subcommittee with this big caveat. As a member of the public, we think it's really important that the members of the subcommittees are able to have their conversations as members. If there's something critical where we need the input of a task force member, it's always helpful to have you there. On those other questions, I will get with the chairs and with our state staff. Our understanding is that the big demands are going to be placed on the executive committee of what you do with recommendations. We have been taking the approach that at least to take any votes, we require a quorum, and that we will document what the vote was on any of those for you all to do with as you please. There is nothing that would prevent you from telling us you must bring us only those recommendations that have a super majority of some kind. Barring that, we will only hold votes when we have a quorum, and we will report to you what the vote was. But we can take further guidance as we go forward. Kirsten, let me go to you for your thoughts on what you'd like to see, and then Lieutenant Governor, you're next on my screen.
Well, I think one of the things I really would like to see is, I think in addition to that, as long as everything is kind of accompanied by like additional information, I just would hate it that what we see is kind of a narrow view of just what a few people actually showed up for. So I think, having a real opportunity in the subcommittees to have written submissions, I think it sounds like that website sounds really cool that is kind of going to be going. I think if there can be some communication at the same time back of what the summary of the written communication, and that's going to be really hard to do. I mean, I think if we're all doing our job and we're very vocal, as I think it sounds like all of these members are really committed, which is great, then there should be a lot of feedback that we receive. So I would want to receive with any recommendation a really good summary of the written comments, as well as the subcommittees, because as much as I would love to attend every subcommittee, there's no way I'm going to be able to do that. And I'm sure I'm not alone. So, I'll focus on the area that's my expertise, but I think what I really want to make sure is that there's numerous opportunities and ways that people can share kind of what they're thinking, even if it doesn't somehow make it and it's not captured in the recommendation, because I think our job as the underlying committee members is to be a little broader than that, right? Like, it's great that they get narrow and they put something in front of us, but I think, there's some areas for sure for myself, I'm going to need a lot more context, and I'm not going to be able to sit in every subcommittee. So that's what I'd like.
I appreciate that. And I think in general, what you will see is we take kind of a pyramid approach to these reports. You'll get the very tip of the pyramid that has, here's the bottom line recommendations.
Yeah.
And just beyond that will be the layer of, here were the votes and the big themes that led to the 1, 2, or 3 opinions around it. And then at the base of that, you're going to find attached to every report, it may be 10 pages, it may be 110 pages of all of the raw notes and conversation as addenda. So I appreciate you sharing what would be useful to you. Our job is to make it easy for you to understand, but not to put any kind of filter on what you receive. Let me go to Lieutenant Governor Primavera, and then I'm going to go to Liz Moran, please.
Well, thanks, Barrick. I agree with Julie about, I think, majority rule, but because we are asking people to volunteer their time, and maybe their dog gets sick, their kid gets sick, they can't make it to a meeting. I think maybe we need to talk about how they vote, because if they don't have to be present to vote, they could send it in on an email or something like that. I think maybe we would get, make sure we had quorums and better participations. I don't want names of who voted what. I think that's, would maybe make people decide to go with the majority if they're the only last person standing. So I don't really want to know who voted against what. I used to drive lobbyists crazy when I was in the Capitol, because they would come to me and want me to tell them how I was going to vote on a bill before I heard it in committee. And I used to say, no, I'm not telling you, because I might hear something in committee from a citizen that might totally change my mind. I can tell you I like the concept, I can tell you whatever, but until I hear from people coming and spending their time testifying, I'm not going to vote, and I'm not going to tell you how I'm going to vote. So I used to drive them crazy. So I think it's important to hear from the committees. Like I used to want to know on bills, who does this hurt and who does it help? Who would oppose it and who would support it? But other than that, I don't want to know names of who voted or anything like that. Because if we know that the business community is really going to oppose something, we might want to know that ahead of time before we make a legislative recommendation or something like that. So just what groups might oppose it, what groups might support it, and whether it was majority vote and what, that kind of thing.
I appreciate that. And for full transparency, I will probably have to get some legal guidance on this as a public body. The meetings and the votes take place publicly. So whether or not we report the vote tally, the roll call to you, most of these activities take place in public. But I will get some legal guidance and come back to everybody here. Yes, ma'am.
Well,
I agree that if we dig deep enough, some of us, we can find out who voted for what. But I don't think that needs to be part of the report at the end.
Very well. You're going to find it. I think this about me, ma'am. I'm just going to always be overly cautious in disclosing what I'm looking at, so I can give you the best guidance here. Liz, I'll get you in, and then Rep Ortiz, please.
That's great. So Barrick, quick correction. It actually is Elizabeth, because we have an Elizabeth, we have a Liz, and we have an Ilsa. And I've recently been called Beth too. But in the ARC network, just so you know, because we have multiple people with the same name. So I go by Elizabeth just to help keep us all straight within the Colorado ARC network.
My apology, and thank you for the
correction. It's all right. I would second everything that the Lieutenant Governor put out there. I would prefer not to have names, at least on the report. Indeed, we can all go digging, or we may have even been at one of those discussions. But I would prefer, at least in the report, that we see an outline of what the vote was. And then we have some bullet points that just sort of give us a summary of the people who were in favor. These are some of the key points. The people who were opposed, here's some of the key points. and then leave the rest of it if we want to go digging deeper. Thanks.
Understood. Thank you. Representative Ortiz, your thoughts on what you would like to receive in the reports in terms of the depth of information about not just the recommendations themselves, but what led to them and what the discussion or vote was.
So I'll just one last sound check. Can you hear me, or am I broken?
We have you clear.
Great. So I like your idea about the bluff, the bottom line up front, about whether it was unanimous, majority, what the vote breakdown was. And I'm going to respectfully disagree with Elizabeth and the Lieutenant Governor for transparency's sake. I think it is important, not just for us as executive committee members, to know what the breakdown of the vote was and like what interests that were represented, whether it was the chamber that voted no, whether it's, but also for community at large to understand what the vote was, and then to be presented. And it's important that we present the reasons why. And ideal too is maybe with the bottom line up front is have it very bullet pointed, top 5, top 10, whatever, like just very succinct one-liners on reasons why each side voted yes or no, and then deeper context, no filtering. This is exactly the long written description of why yes and no. But I'm going to respectfully disagree with the Lieutenant Governor and with Elizabeth, because transparency is always better in a democracy. It is important that community living with a disability understand who voted in what way, also to understand why, but also to who voted in what way. So I think that's really, really important. I do like the Lieutenant Governor's recommendation on, if it's legal, allowing alternate ways to vote when the vote comes down to it, because just because someone can't get off at that specific meeting time or be on a Zoom, I still think their vote is valuable, and I would still like their participation.
Right. Thank you very much, Representative. And I will get with state legal and confirm what the breadth of options we have, since the subcommittees are actually making recommendations to the task force, and you are the ones who will be advancing policy or legislative recommendations. To me, that's a gray area I haven't been in before. So we will get legal guidance on what we can do in terms of proxies, in terms of alternate means of placing those votes. I'm also going to make the move to put onto our next Executive Council meeting agenda a specific discussion among all members about this voting issue and the transparency or anonymity of it. I don't want to rush this. We've heard multiple opinions on it. We've got some time, but I think members of the subcommittee should know how that's going to unfold. And I think more importantly, it's critical that you all come to agreement on that so we can have a standardization across those conversations. We are at 3 minutes till the hour, and I want to leave a couple minutes at the end for our chair and vice chair to close us out. Our next steps, as Carrie said, we'll follow up with some links to things like Engage Dora, to the subcommittee engagement survey, so we can get all of you plugged in. We'll make sure you have the links to all of the Zooms and the calendar for all of the subcommittees. And we will continue to stagger going forward the subcommittees that we will have present to all of you. I want to truly thank all of the subcommittee members who joined us and stuck around, and everybody who just spent some time. Lieutenant Governor and then Representative Ortiz, I'm going to have you two take the floor to close us out.
All right. Well, I just want to thank everybody again and again for their participation, not only in the subcommittee meetings, but today. You know, we've got a huge but really important undertaking on our agenda, and I want to thank Rep. Ortiz too for being the voice at the Capitol for all disability issues. Even though you disagree with me on who voted, I still really appreciate all the work you do, Rep. Ortiz, to advance disability policy and law. And then I appreciate the fact that we can elevate on our social, that we want input on the different subcommittees and things like that. So I will get with my comms person and make sure that when we're all set, I'll elevate that too. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, ma'am. Representative Ortiz, you get the final words today.
I can't say it better than that. I want to thank the Lieutenant Governor for being the shoulders, and Julie. And others. I mean, there's so many people here that have been doing this work for so much longer. And so I'm just so humbled by what we have been able to push so far. I'm so humbled that, that we're now acting as the tip of the spear to be the example. My family comes from Texas by way of Mexico. It used to be, they used to be there when it was Mexico. So there's a lot of ego and pride that goes into being a part of a state. And I want to see Colorado lead the way when it comes to basic access and disability rights, and show the other states in this nation that not only is this the right thing to do, but it's possible, and it's possible to do it together, even with differing viewpoints and different perspectives. So thank everybody so much. I'm looking forward to see what comes out of it.
With that, thank you all for your time. We'll be in touch by email over the coming week, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you.